Hello there, Night Wanderers and Truth Seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope you're having a wonderful day, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Whether you're listening at 2 a.m. in Tokyo, during your lunch break in London, or while driving through the American heartland, I want to know, how has your day been treating you? And more importantly, where are you tuning in from tonight? If you're new here, welcome to Sleep Theories, where we explore the stories they don't want you to hear, the files they thought were buried forever. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got so much more to uncover together. Now settle in, because what you're about to hear will change how you look at every rainstorm for the rest of your life. The following audio journals were recovered from a hard drive hidden in a storage unit in Spokane, Washington, in 2024. The renter, listed as L. Martinez, had not paid rent in over 2 years. The recordings are presented here exactly as they were found, with minimal editing for clarity. The speaker identifies herself as Dr. Lena Marrow, formerly of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. What follows is her account of the Oakville incident, a story that begins with strange rain and ends with questions that still keep government officials awake at night. Date: August 9th, 1994. Time: 11:47 p.m. Location: Motel 6, Centralia, Washington. Static. Then the sound of a woman clearing her throat. This is Dr. Lena Marrow, CDC identification number 4471-Delta. I'm recording this on my personal device because I have a feeling the official channels aren't going to want to hear what I'm about to say. 2 days ago, I was in my lab in Atlanta, running routine cultures on a nasty strain of E. coli from a food processing plant in Georgia. Normal Tuesday stuff. Then the call came in around 3 in the afternoon, emergency deployment to rural Washington state. Something about a biological anomaly affecting multiple civilians. They gave me the basics on the flight. Sunday morning, August 7th, the town of Oakville, Washington, population barely 600, experienced what locals described as gel rain. Not normal rain, not hail, but translucent gelatinous blobs falling from the sky for approximately 6 hours straight. By Sunday evening, 23 people had been hospitalised with severe flu-like symptoms. By Monday, that number had climbed to 41. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen anthrax scares that turned out to be flour, mysterious rashes that were poison ivy, and zombie outbreaks that were actually just really bad food poisoning. But something about this one felt different from the moment I stepped off the plane in Seattle. For starters, they didn't send me alone. Usually, for small rural incidents, it's just me and maybe a local health official. This time, I had a full team. Dr. Marcus Webb from the Virology Division, Dr. Sarah Chen from Environmental Health, and, this is where it gets weird, a military liaison named Colonel Hayes, who wouldn't tell us which branch he represented. "Just think of me as your government escort," he said when I asked. Real friendly guy. The kind of friendly that makes your skin crawl. We drove down to Oakville in a convoy of black SUVs, not exactly subtle for a sleepy logging town. The whole drive, Colonel Hayes kept making phone calls in some kind of code. "Package secure? Phase 3 confirmed," that sort of thing. When I asked what Phase 3 meant, he just smiled and said, "Medical terminology, Doctor. Above your clearance level." Above my clearance level, I have level 4 biosafety clearance. I've worked with hemorrhagic fever viruses that could kill half of Atlanta if mishandled. What exactly was above my clearance level? We got to Oakville around 4 in the afternoon. Picture a town that time forgot. One main street, a few shops, houses scattered around like someone threw them from a plane and left them where they landed. But what struck me immediately was how quiet it was. No kids playing, no dogs barking, hardly any people on the streets. Those who were out moved slowly, like they were walking through invisible molasses. The local sheriff, a guy named Don Murphy, met us at what passed for the town hall. Big man, probably 60, with the kind of weathered face you get from 30 years of dealing with drunk loggers and domestic disputes. But his hands were shaking when he handed me the incident report. "Never seen anything like it, Doc," he said. "One minute it's a normal Sunday morning, next minute it's raining. I don't even know what to call it. Jelly? Slime?" My wife got a piece of it on her hand when she went to get the mail, said it felt warm, like it was alive. I asked him where the samples were. He led us to the back of the building where they'd set up a makeshift containment area, really just a card table with some Tupperware containers. Amateur hour, but I've seen worse from small-town officials. The samples were unlike anything I'd encountered before. Translucent, gelatinous, roughly the size and consistency of jellyfish, but without any discernible structure. No cell walls that I could see with the naked eye, no obvious organisation, just blobs. Some were clear, others had a slightly yellowish tint. They didn't smell like anything, which was almost more disturbing than if they'd reeked. Dr. Webb poked one with a sterile probe. It jiggled like jello, but then, and I swear this happened, it seemed to recoil slightly from the probe, like it was trying to get away. "Did you see that?" I asked him. "See what?" But his face told me he'd seen it too. Colonel Hayes was taking pictures with some kind of specialised camera, muttering measurements into a recording device. When I asked if we could get some samples back to a proper lab for analysis, he said the Army had already arranged for field testing equipment. "Field testing for what?" Dr. Chen asked. "Standard biological warfare protocols," Hayes replied, like he was discussing the weather. Biological warfare protocols for rain gel in rural Washington. That night, back at the motel, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment when the sample seemed to move away from the probe. Gelatinous masses don't have nervous systems. They don't have survival instincts. They don't recoil, unless they're not what they appear to be. Long pause, sound of papers rustling. I'm going to try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we start the real analysis. But I have a feeling we're not going to like what we find. End of entry number 1. Date, August 10th, 1994. Time, 6:23 a.m. Location, Oakville Community Centre, converted field lab. Sound of equipment humming, distant voices. Good morning, if you can call it good. I didn't sleep much last night, and from the looks of my team neither did they. Dr. Webb had bags under his eyes that could carry groceries, and Dr. Chen kept checking and rechecking her equipment like she was afraid it might betray her. Colonel Hayes, on the other hand, looked like he'd had a full 8 hours and a continental breakfast. He'd somehow managed to have a complete mobile laboratory set up in the Oakville Community Centre overnight. I'm talking electron microscopes, DNA sequencing equipment, atmospheric analysis tools, stuff that usually takes weeks to requisition and ship. When I asked how he'd managed it, he just said the Army keeps emergency research assets stationed throughout the Pacific Northwest. Emergency research assets for biological incidents in towns with populations smaller than my high school graduating class. We started the analysis around 7 this morning. The first thing we did was basic microscopy on the gel samples. What we found... Christ, I don't even know how to describe it properly. The samples contained human white blood cells. Not similar to human white blood cells. Actual human white blood cells, complete with the proper cellular structure and protein markers. But they were embedded in this matrix of something else. Something that definitely wasn't human. Dr. Chen ran the environmental analysis first. She found traces of aircraft fuel compounds in the gel, specifically JP-8 fuel used by military aircraft. When she mentioned this to Colonel Hayes, he suddenly became very interested in her methodology. Could be contamination from atmospheric particulates, he suggested. Lots of air traffic over Washington state. But Chen had already thought of that. She'd run control samples from the surrounding area. The fuel compounds were only present in the gel samples, and in concentrations that suggested direct contact, not atmospheric absorption. Something carrying JP-8 fuel came into direct contact with this material, she told me quietly, when Hayes stepped out to make another of his coded phone calls. That's when Dr. Webb made the discovery that changed everything. He'd been examining one of the gel samples under high magnification, documenting its cellular structure, when he noticed something moving. Not the random Brownian motion you'd expect from particles in solution, but directed movement. Purposeful movement. "Lena, you need to see this," he called out. I rushed over to his workstation. On the monitor displaying the microscope feed, I could see what looked like bacterial structures, but they were moving in formation, coordinated, like they were following some kind of instruction set. "Are those bacteria?" I asked. "I don't know what they are," Webb admitted. "They have some bacterial characteristics, but the behaviour is all wrong. Bacteria don't move in patterns like this. And look at this." He switched to a different sample. This one contained what appeared to be 2 distinct bacterial strains, but they weren't competing for resources like you'd expect. They were working together, cooperating. I've never seen anything like it in nature. "It's like they've been engineered," Webb whispered. That's when Colonel Hayes returned from his phone call and his demeanour had completely changed. The casual military friendliness was gone, replaced by something much more serious. "I need to see all of your findings," he said. Not asked, demanded. We showed him everything. The human white blood cells, the fuel compounds, the cooperative bacterial strains. He listened without comment, taking notes in a small black notebook that he kept angled away from our view. When we finished, he closed the notebook and looked at each of us in turn. "What you found here is classified under the Biological Weapons Convention of 1972, he said. "Everything you've seen, everything you've tested, and everything you've recorded is now classified at the highest levels of national security." Dr. Chen started to protest. "We're CDC personnel. We don't work for the military. We have reporting obligations to—" "Doctor," Hayes interrupted, "as of this moment, you're working under a joint military-civilian task force, authorized by executive order. Your reporting obligations are now to me." He handed us each a document to sign. Non-disclosure agreements with language I'd never seen before. Penalties for violation included not just termination and criminal prosecution, but something called administrative detention for national security purposes. I've signed NDAs before, every CDC employee has. But this was different. This wasn't about protecting public health information or maintaining quarantine protocols. This was about hiding something. "What exactly are we hiding?" I asked. Hayes looked at me for a long moment. "Dr. Marrow, have you ever considered the possibility that some biological incidents aren't accidents?" Before I could ask what he meant, one of his assistants, when had assistants arrived, whispered something in his ear. Hayes nodded and turned back to us. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. For tonight, I need you to secure all samples and shut down your analysis equipment. No further testing until I give the authorization." As we packed up our equipment, I noticed Dr. Webb palming one of the smaller sample containers. He caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the back exit. Smart man, because something about this whole situation stank worse than week-old biological cultures. Sound of equipment being moved, voices growing distant. I'm heading back to the motel now. Tonight, Dr. Webb and I are going to do some unauthorized analysis. If Colonel Hayes wants to classify our findings, we need to know what we're actually being asked to hide, and I have a terrible feeling we're not going to like the answer. End of entry number 2. Date: August 11th, 1994. Time: 2:14 AM. Location: Motel 6, Room 127. Whispered voice, sounds of typing in background. Jesus Christ, I don't even know where to start. Webb and I spent the evening running analysis on the sample he'd smuggled out. We had to use his personal laptop and some portable equipment he'd brought for emergencies, but what we found, it changes everything we thought we knew about the Oakville incident. First, the bacterial strains. We managed to isolate and identify them using Webb's portable DNA sequencing kit. One of them matched a known strain of Bacillus cereus. Not unusual, you can find it in soil and food products. But the other strain was completely unknown. Not just a new variant, but something that doesn't match anything in the genetic databases. But here's the really disturbing part. The unknown strain showed clear signs of genetic modification, specific sequences that don't occur naturally, inserted with surgical precision. Someone had deliberately engineered this bacterium, and from what we could determine, it was designed to interact with human neurochemistry. "It's targeting neurotransmitter production," Webb explained, pointing to the protein structures on his laptop screen. "Specifically dopamine and serotonin pathways. This isn't meant to kill people, it's meant to affect their behaviour." Behaviour modification through biological agents. That's not medical research. That's weapons development. We were just starting to process the implications when Dr. Chen appeared at our door. She looked terrible, pale, shaking, eyes wide with panic. "They took Marcus," she said. "What do you mean, took him?" I asked. "Dr. Peterson, the environmental specialist who was supposed to arrive this morning. He never showed up at the community centre, so I went to check on him at his motel. His room was empty, but there were signs of a struggle, and this was on the floor." She handed me a small electronic device I didn't recognise immediately. Webb looked at it and went white. "That's a data mining device," he said. "Military grade. It's used to extract information from computers and mobile devices." Chen nodded. His laptop was gone, his phone was gone, even his backup drives. But whoever took him missed this. It was under the bed. She opened her own laptop and inserted the device. After a few minutes of technical wizardry that was way above my pay grade, she managed to access its stored data. "Oh my god," she whispered. On the screen was a document marked Classified Project Rainvil Phase 3 Operational Summary. I'll try to reproduce the key sections here, though my hands are shaking as I type this. Objective: Field test of aerosolized behavioral modification compound in controlled civilian population. Delivery method: KC-135. Stratotanker equipped with weather modification dispersal system. Target area: Oakville, Washington. Population 598. Isolated minimal media attention probability. Compound composition: synthetic gel matrix containing engineered bacterial agents, B7, mood suppression, and B12, compliance enhancement, plus human leukocytes for immune system camouflage. Expected results: 72-hour onset period. Symptoms include mild fever, cognitive fog, reduced anxiety response, increased suggestion susceptibility. Monitoring protocol: embedded CDC team to document civilian response while maintaining cover story of natural phenomenon investigation. Escalation authority: Colonel J. Hayes, Project Rainvil Operations Command. There were more details: technical specifications, dosage calculations, even psychological assessment protocols for measuring compliance enhancement in the affected population. But what made my blood run cold was the final section. Phase 4. Authorization. Upon successful completion of Phase 3 field test, recommend expansion to larger population centres. Proposed targets include rural communities in Oregon, Idaho and Montana, with eventual metropolitan deployment pending Senate Armed Services Committee approval. They weren't studying a natural phenomenon. They weren't even studying an accidental release of biological material. They had deliberately rained biological weapons on American citizens as a test run for larger operations. "How many people know about this?" I asked Chen. Peterson and I were the only ones with clearance to access the environmental data, but Peterson suspected something was wrong with the whole operation. He'd been asking questions about the military involvement, the secrecy protocols, why we needed level 5 containment procedures for what was supposed to be an algae bloom. "That's why they took him," Webb said quietly. We spent the next 2 hours copying everything we could from the device onto multiple backup drives. The full scope of Project Rainvil was even more disturbing than the initial document had suggested. This wasn't some rogue military operation. It was part of a larger program dating back to the 1960s, designed to test the feasibility of using biological agents for population control. Not population reduction, population control, making people more compliant, less likely to resist government authority, more susceptible to media manipulation. The Oakville incident was just the latest in a series of tests conducted on unwitting American communities over the past 30 years. There were references to similar operations in small towns across the Midwest and Southwest, all documented with the same clinical detachment you'd expect from a pharmaceutical trial. But they weren't testing medicine, they were testing methods for controlling human behaviour on a mass scale. Long pause, sound of someone taking deep breaths. We've hidden copies of the data in 3 different locations. If something happens to us, at least there will be a record of what really happened here. Tomorrow we're supposed to report back to Colonel Hayes with our final analysis of the Oakville samples. He expects us to conclude that the incident was caused by natural atmospheric phenomena, algae blooms, bacterial contamination, nothing that can't be explained by meteorology and bad luck. But I can't do it. I became a doctor to help people, not to cover up biological weapons tests on American citizens. Even if it means the end of my career, I have to find a way to expose what's really happening here. The question is, how do you fight an enemy that can rain compliance from the sky? End of entry number 3. Date: August 11th, 1994. Time: 6:45 p.m. Location: Oakville Community Center. Background noise of equipment being packed, multiple voices. Today was supposed to be our final day of analysis. Colonel Hayes called a team meeting for 8 this morning to discuss our conclusions about the Oakville incident. I walked into that community centre knowing it might be the last honest thing I ever did as a CDC scientist. But I wasn't prepared for what Hayes told us. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing in front of a projector screen that showed aerial photographs of Oakville, "your analysis has been extremely valuable to national security. However, the nature of your findings requires us to adjust our public reporting strategy." He clicked to the next slide, a draft report concluding that the Oakville incident was caused by atmospheric algae blooms, combined with unusual weather patterns and trace bacterial contamination from agricultural runoff. "This is the report that will be filed with the CDC, the Washington State Department of Health, and local authorities," Hayes continued. "It explains the symptoms observed in local residents and provides recommendations for preventing similar incidents in the future." Dr. Chen raised her hand. "Colonel, this report doesn't mention the human white blood cells we found in the samples, or the engineered bacterial strains, or the aircraft fuel compounds." Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Chen, I'm afraid there may have been some contamination in your testing procedures. When we ran independent analysis on the same samples, we found no evidence of the anomalies you described." He clicked to another slide showing laboratory results that looked exactly like ours, except all the anomalous findings had been replaced with standard bacterial cultures you'd expect from environmental contamination. "I don't understand," Webb said. "We have documented evidence of—" "Dr. Webb," Hayes interrupted, "you have documented evidence of testing errors caused by inadequate field laboratory conditions. It's not uncommon for researchers working in improvised settings to introduce contamination that produces false positive results." I realised what was happening. They weren't just covering up the biological weapons test. They were gaslighting us into believing our own findings were mistakes. "What about Dr. Peterson?" I asked. "Where is he?" Hayes consulted his notebook. "Dr. Peterson was recalled to Atlanta yesterday afternoon due to a family emergency. He sends his regrets for leaving without saying goodbye." The lies were so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed them myself. If I hadn't seen the Project Rainvil documents with my own eyes, if I hadn't made copies of all our real findings, I might have convinced myself that we'd somehow contaminated our samples or misread our equipment. But I knew the truth, and from the looks on Webb's and Chen's faces they knew it too. "Now," Hayes continued, "I need each of you to sign this amended report confirming these corrected findings. Your signatures indicate that you stand behind the scientific accuracy of this document." Chen was the first to crack. "I can't sign something I know isn't true." Hayes looked at her with what might have been sympathy. "Dr. Chen, I understand your concern for scientific integrity, but sometimes the greater good requires us to accept that our individual perspectives might be limited. The greater good?" I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Colonel, we found evidence of biological weapons testing on American civilians. How is covering that up serving the greater good?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hayes closed his notebook and looked directly at me. "Dr. Marrow, I think you may be suffering from the stress of extended field work. It's not uncommon for researchers to develop paranoid interpretations of routine data when working under pressure." Paranoid interpretations, there it was, the classic discredit and marginalise strategy. "However," Hayes continued, "I'm prepared to be understanding about the psychological effects of this assignment. If you sign the corrected report, we can arrange for you to take some administrative leave. Time to recover from what has obviously been a traumatic experience." The threat was clear. Sign the false report and disappear quietly, or be labelled mentally unstable and discredited professionally. Webb and Chen both signed. I watched them do it, their hands shaking as they wrote their names on documents they knew were lies. I don't blame them. They have families, mortgages, careers to protect. The system is designed to make resistance too costly for ordinary people. But I didn't sign. "I need more time to review the data," I told Hayes. He nodded like he'd expected this. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just remember, Doctor, sometimes the most patriotic thing a scientist can do is know when to stop asking questions." Sound of chairs scraping, people leaving. Everyone else has gone home. I'm alone in the community centre now, supposedly packing up the last of our equipment. But really, I'm trying to figure out what to do next. I've spent my entire career believing that science serves truth, and truth serves the public good. But what happens when the truth is so dangerous that revealing it might be worse than hiding it? What if they're right? What if there are threats to national security that justify testing biological weapons on unwitting civilians? What if the greater good really does require some people to suffer in ignorance so that others can be protected? Long pause. Number, I can't accept that. The moment we start justifying weapons tests on our own people, we've lost everything worth protecting. I'm going to find a way to expose Project Rainvil. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make sure the world knows what happened in Oakville, even if it destroys me. End of entry number 4. Date: August 13th, 1994. Time: 11:30 p.m. Location: undisclosed. Voice much more subdued. Sounds of traffic in background. I can't tell you where I am right now. It's not safe. Yesterday, after I refused to sign Hayes' fabricated report, things moved very quickly. I went back to my motel room to find 2 men in suits waiting for me in the parking lot. They identified themselves as federal agents, but when I asked to see their credentials, they just smiled and suggested we have a conversation. The conversation took place in the back of a black sedan with tinted windows. They didn't threaten me directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they told me about other CDC researchers who'd developed psychological problems after stressful field assignments. Researchers who'd been quietly moved to desk jobs or taken extended medical leave, or simply transferred to positions where their paranoid tendencies wouldn't be a problem. Dr. Marrow, one of them said, "We understand you've been under a lot of pressure lately. Working in field conditions, dealing with unusual biological samples, the stress of trying to protect public health. It's enough to make anyone start seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences." They offered me a choice: accept a transfer to a nice, quiet position in the CDC's Historical Archives Division, or continue to insist on my misinterpretation of the Oakville data and face the consequences of being labelled psychologically unfit for fieldwork. I told them I needed time to think about it. That was a mistake. This morning I got a call from my supervisor in Atlanta. Apparently there had been concerns raised about my mental state during the Washington assignment. I was being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. When I tried to access my CDC email account, my password had been changed. When I called the IT department, they told me my account had been suspended for security reasons. My CDC credit cards were cancelled, my official phone was remotely wiped. In less than 24 hours, they'd completely severed my connection to the agency I'd worked for 8 years. But they made one mistake. They assumed I'd kept all my evidence in official channels. Before leaving Oakville, I'd mailed copies of our real findings to 3 different addresses: a journalist I knew from graduate school, a professor at Johns Hopkins who specialised in biological weapons research, and my own personal storage unit in Atlanta. I'd also uploaded encrypted copies to a private bulletin board system that a friend of mine ran for sharing research data. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to find and destroy all of those copies, and I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Sound of papers rustling. I've been doing my own research over the past 2 days, using public records and Freedom of Information Act requests to trace the history of Project Rainvil. What I've found is terrifying in its scope. The Oakville incident wasn't isolated. Over the past 30 years, there have been at least 24 similar events in small communities across the United States. Strange weather phenomena followed by unexplained illnesses, always in rural areas with populations under 1,000, always with minimal media attention. 1967, Eureka, Utah. Residents reported snow that wouldn't melt, followed by a flu outbreak that left most of the town bedridden for weeks. 1973, Millfield, Ohio. A chemical spill from a passing truck caused respiratory problems and severe lethargy in local residents. 1981, Hanksville, Utah. Military aircraft conducting weather research preceded an outbreak of what doctors called desert fever. Symptoms included cognitive fog and unusual compliance with authority figures. 1988, Jordan Valley, Oregon. Atmospheric algae blooms caused flu-like symptoms and temporary memory problems in nearly half the town's population. The pattern is always the same: unusual atmospheric phenomena followed by specific symptoms that include not just physical illness, but psychological changes: reduced anxiety, increased suggestibility, temporary memory problems, and always military aircraft in the area immediately before the incident. But here's what really scares me. I found evidence that some of these tests were deemed successful and led to larger-scale operations. In 1976, San Francisco experienced what was officially described as a fog phenomenon that caused widespread respiratory problems. Thousands of people were affected. but the symptoms were dismissed as a particularly bad flu season. What the public wasn't told was that military aircraft had been conducting weather modification experiments over the Bay Area for months leading up to the incident. They've been testing biological weapons on American citizens for decades, refining their techniques, expanding their scope. The Oakville incident was just the latest iteration of a program that's been growing bolder and more sophisticated over time. Long pause, sound of someone lighting a cigarette. I tried to call the journalist I'd sent documents to. Her editor told me she'd been reassigned to cover local politics and wasn't available for comment on conspiracy theories. The professor at Johns Hopkins never returned my calls, and when I finally reached his department, they told me he was on sabbatical in Europe with no forwarding address. Someone got to them. Someone with enough influence to silence respected professionals with just a phone call. But they haven't found all of my evidence yet, and they haven't silenced me. I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to find out how high this goes, how many people know about Project Rainvil, and what they're planning next. Because I have a terrible feeling that Oakville was just a small-scale test for something much bigger. The question isn't whether they're going to do this again. The question is where, when, and how many people will be affected next time. End of entry number 5. Date: August 20th, 1994. Time: 3:17. AM location: unknown. Voice tired, stressed, sounds of typing. It's been a week since my last recording and everything has gone to hell. I thought I was being careful. I thought I was covering my tracks. But they've been watching me since the moment I left Oakville, and they're very, very good at what they do. 3 days ago, I was staying in a small motel outside Portland, trying to piece together more information about Project Rainvil using public records and online databases. I'd managed to identify what I thought was the command structure for the program. A joint task force involving elements from the Army, the Air Force, and something called the Biological Defense Research Command that doesn't officially exist. I was making good progress, connecting the dots between various military installations, research facilities, and the locations of suspected biological weapons tests. I'd even found what looked like budget allocations for atmospheric delivery systems buried in Defense Department spending reports. That's when they found me. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of someone trying to pick the lock on my motel room door. I'd been paranoid enough to wedge a chair under the handle and set up some improvised early warning systems, glasses balanced on the doorknob, that sort of thing. When I heard the glasses fall, I knew I had maybe 30 seconds before they got in. I grabbed my laptop and the backup drives, threw them in a bag and went out the bathroom window. It was a 2-story drop and I'm pretty sure I sprained my ankle when I landed, but it was better than waiting around to see what they had planned for me. From the parking lot I could see 3 men in my room searching through everything I'd left behind. They were thorough, checking inside the toilet tank, ripping apart the mattress, even removing electrical outlet covers to look for hidden storage. These weren't amateur government agents. These were professionals who'd done this kind of thing many times before. I limped to my rental car and drove until dawn, changing direction randomly, paying cash for everything, trying to stay ahead of whatever tracking systems they might be using to find me. But they found me anyway. Yesterday, I stopped at a library in a small town whose name I won't record here, trying to use their computers to continue my research. After about an hour of digging through military contractor databases, every computer in the library suddenly lost internet access. The librarian said it was probably a problem with their service provider. But when I went outside, I saw a van parked across the street with sophisticated communications equipment visible through the back windows. Someone had jammed the library's internet connection to stop me from accessing information they didn't want me to see. That's when I realised the full scope of what I was up against. This isn't just a cover-up of one biological weapons test. This is a coordinated campaign involving multiple agencies, military units, and intelligence services. They have the resources to monitor internet traffic, jam communications, and track individuals across multiple states in real time. But they've also made a mistake. They've shown me how scared they are. If Project Rainvil was just a minor research program that got out of hand, they wouldn't need this level of resources to contain the story. The fact that they're throwing this much manpower and technology at stopping one CDC researcher means the program is much bigger and much more important than I initially thought. Sound of papers rustling, typing. I've managed to piece together more of the picture using cached web pages and archived documents I downloaded, before they started actively interfering with my research. What I've found suggests that Project Rainvil isn't just about testing biological weapons, it's about implementing them. The psychological effects we documented in Oakville, increased compliance, reduced anxiety, temporary memory problems, aren't side effects of biological contamination. They're the intended results of a sophisticated behaviour modification program. Think about it. What if you could make entire populations more accepting of government authority? What if you could reduce civil unrest, decrease crime rates, and increase social stability by adjusting the neurochemistry of millions of people simultaneously? That's what Project Rainvil is really about. Not killing people, but controlling them. Making them easier to govern, less likely to resist, more willing to accept whatever they're told by authority figures. And from what I can determine, they've been testing and refining these techniques for 30 years, gradually expanding the scope of their operations. Oakville wasn't an isolated incident. It was a field test for nationwide deployment. Long pause. I found something else in the archived documents. References to what they call Phase 4 implementation. Budget projections for large-scale atmospheric delivery systems. Purchase orders for chemical compounds measured not in grams or kilograms, but in tons. They're not planning small-scale tests anymore. They're planning to deploy these biological agents over major metropolitan areas. And based on the timeline in the documents I've seen, Phase 4 is supposed to begin sometime in the next 2 years. I have to find a way to stop this, but I'm running out of options and they're getting closer. End of entry number 6. Date: August 25th, 1994. Time: 7:42. PM. Location: redacted. Voice noticeably more strained, background sounds of wind. This is probably going to be my last recording for a while, maybe my last recording ever. 5 days ago, I thought I'd found the break I needed. Using a combination of military contractor databases and cross-referencing with air traffic control records, I'd managed to identify the specific aircraft used in the Oakville operation. A KC-135 Stratotanker, tail number 63-8877, operating out of McCord Air Force Base near Tacoma. More importantly, I'd found the flight manifest for August 6th, 1994, the day before the Oakville incident. The aircraft had conducted what was officially logged as a weather modification training exercise over southwestern Washington, with a flight path that took it directly over Oakville at approximately 3:47 a.m. The pilot was Major Dennis Kowalski, a veteran of the Gulf War with specialized training in chemical and biological weapons delivery systems. The mission commander was Colonel James Hayes, the same Colonel Hayes who'd overseen our investigation of the incident. I had proof, direct, undeniable evidence that the Oakville incident was a deliberate military operation using biological weapons against American civilians. But when I tried to use this information, everything fell apart. I contacted an investigative journalist at the Washington Post, thinking that a major newspaper would have the resources and credibility to break this story. I sent him encrypted copies of all my documentation, including the flight records, the Project Rainvil documents, and our original laboratory analysis. He called me back within hours, excited about the story. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle to discuss how to proceed. He never showed up. When I called the Post the next day, they told me he'd been reassigned to cover a congressional hearing on agricultural subsidies. When I pressed for more information, they said he wasn't available for comment on pending investigations. That's when I realised they'd gotten to him too. Whatever influence Project Rainvil had, it was powerful enough to silence journalists at major newspapers. So I tried a different approach. I reached out to a congressional aide I knew from college, someone who worked for a senator known for investigating government misconduct. I figured that Congress had oversight authority over military operations, and that elected officials might be harder to silence than journalists. I was wrong. The aide was interested at first, but after I sent him the documents, his attitude changed completely. He called me back and suggested that I might be misinterpreting the evidence, that the stress of my CDC work had caused me to see patterns that aren't really there. The exact same language Hayes and his people had used. Someone had gotten to him within 24 hours of receiving my information. Either they'd threatened him, paid him off, or convinced him that I was mentally unstable. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. Sound of typing, papers rustling. But then I found something that changed everything. A name I recognized from my graduate research. Dr. Elizabeth Carver, formerly of the Army's Biological Weapons Research Program at Fort Detrick. Dr. Carver had been a whistleblower in the 1970s, exposing illegal human experimentation programs run by the military. She'd faced the same kind of harassment and discrediting that I was experiencing, but she'd managed to get her story out through alternative channels. More importantly, she was still alive and still fighting. I managed to track her down through academic networks. She was working as a professor at a small college in Vermont, keeping a low profile but still conducting research into government biological weapons programs. When I called her, she knew exactly what I was talking about before I even mentioned Project Rainvil. They've been expanding the program, she told me. What you saw in Oakville was just the latest test. They've been working on this for decades, and they're getting ready to go operational. She agreed to meet with me, but only under very specific conditions. No phones, no electronic devices, no credit card transactions. Cash only, public places, multiple contingency plans for communication. They're very good at what they do, she warned me, and they have resources you can't imagine. But they're not invincible. There are ways to fight back. We met 3 days ago in a small diner in rural Montana. Dr. Carver was in her 60s, grey-haired and unassuming, but when she spoke about the biological weapons program, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades studying the subject. The Oakville incident follows the same pattern as dozens of other tests, she explained. They select isolated communities, deploy biological agents designed to affect behaviour and cognition, then monitor the results while maintaining plausible deniability. She showed me documents I'd never seen before, classified reports dating back to the 1960s describing similar operations, not just in the United States, but in allied countries whose governments had agreed to let American forces conduct defensive research on their soil. The ultimate goal, she said, is population-scale behaviour modification. They want to be able to adjust the psychological state of entire regions, making people more compliant, less likely to resist government authority, more susceptible to propaganda and social manipulation. The scope of what she was describing was staggering. Not just occasional weapons tests, but a systematic program to develop the capability for mass psychological control. But why? I asked. What's the point of having a compliant population if you have to drug them to achieve it? Dr. Carver smiled grimly. Because the people who run these programs believe that democracy is inherently unstable. They think that giving people too much freedom leads to chaos, rebellion, and social collapse. In their view, a little bit of chemical compliance is a small price to pay for social stability. She explained that Project Rainvil was part of a larger strategic initiative called Cognitive Stability Operations, designed to give the government tools for managing what they called democratic volatility. The idea was that by subtly adjusting the neurochemistry of target populations, they could prevent civil unrest, reduce crime rates, and maintain social order without the need for overt authoritarian measures. They see it as a more humane alternative to military occupation, or police-state tactics, she said. Instead of oppressing people directly, they just make people less inclined to resist oppression. Long pause, sound of wind getting stronger. Dr. Carver gave me more than just information. She gave me hope. There are others, she told me. Scientists, journalists, government officials who know what's happening and are working to expose it. We have to be careful. We have to be smart, but we're not alone. She put me in touch with a network of researchers and activists who've been tracking government biological weapons programs for years. They have resources, connections, and most importantly, they have a plan for getting this information to the public in a way that can't be suppressed or discredited. But the plan requires me to disappear for a while, to go completely underground, cut all ties to my previous life, and work with them to build an airtight case that even the government's media manipulation capabilities can't dismiss. The moment you surface again, Dr. Carver warned me, they'll do everything they can to destroy your credibility. They'll say you're mentally ill, they'll fabricate evidence of erratic behaviour, they'll turn your friends and family against you. You have to be prepared for that. I am prepared, or at least I think I am. Sound of car doors slamming, engine starting. They found me. I can see headlights approaching from both directions on the highway. I don't know how they tracked me here, but I'm out of time. If you're hearing this recording, it means I managed to upload it to the dead drop Dr. Carver set up before they caught me. It means the network of researchers and activists she told me about is real, and they're continuing the work. But more importantly, it means that somewhere in the world, people are still fighting for the truth. Project Rainvil is real. The biological weapons tests on American civilians are real. The plan to deploy behaviour modification agents over major population centres is real. And if we don't stop them, if we don't expose what they're doing, then the next time it rains you might want to ask yourself, is this water falling from the sky, or is it something else entirely? Sound of vehicles approaching, voices shouting. Remember Oakville. Remember what they did to those people. And remember that the price of freedom is... Recording cuts off abruptly. Date, March 15th, 2024. Source, anonymous upload to secure drop. Different voice, younger male. My name is Dr. James Mitchell, and I'm a microbiologist with the Nebraska Department of Health. 3 weeks ago, the town of Hartington, Nebraska, experienced what local officials are calling an unusual weather event. On February 23, 2024, gelatinous material fell from the sky over a 6-hour period. Within 48 hours, over 100 residents had been hospitalised with flu-like symptoms, cognitive fog, and what doctors are describing as temporary behavioural changes. The CDC has classified the incident as a natural phenomenon caused by atmospheric algae blooms. The military has denied any aircraft operations in the area. But I've run my own analysis on samples of the material, and what I've found matches exactly what Dr. Lena Marrow documented in her recordings from the Oakville incident 30 years ago. Human white blood cells embedded in an unknown matrix, engineered bacterial strains designed to affect neurochemistry, aircraft fuel compounds indicating direct military involvement. They're still doing it. They're still testing biological weapons on American civilians. Dr. Marrow's recordings resurfaced last week on a secure server, along with a cache of documents from Project Rainvil and its successor programs. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's being distributed to journalists, researchers, and government officials around the world. But that's not why I'm making this recording. I'm making this recording because the Hartington incident wasn't an isolated test. According to the leaked documents, it was part of something called Phase 7 implementation, a nationwide deployment of biological agents designed to increase social compliance and reduce civil unrest. The documents include target lists, major metropolitan areas, specific dates and delivery methods, and a timeline that suggests the full deployment is scheduled to begin within the next 6 months. Dr. Marrow was right about everything. The government has been developing the capability for mass psychological control, and they're finally ready to use it. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Sound of typing. I'm uploading Dr. Marrow's complete audio journals, along with all the supporting documentation from Project Rainvil and its successor programs, to multiple secure servers around the world. I'm also sending copies to journalists, researchers, and government officials who might be able to act on this information. But I need everyone who hears this to understand. They're not going to stop just because we've exposed them. They've been planning this for decades, and they have resources and influence that most of us can't even imagine. The only way to stop them is if enough people know the truth, if enough people refuse to accept the official explanations, if enough people demand answers when unusual weather events are followed by mysterious illnesses, so the next time it rains, look up, look closely, and ask yourself, what's really falling from the sky? Because Dr. Lena Marrow gave her life to warn us about what's coming. The least we can do is listen. Hello there, fellow seekers of hidden truths. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I hope your day has been treating you well, whether it's morning coffee where you are, an afternoon break, or you're settling in for the evening like so many of our listeners around the globe, from Tokyo to London, Sao Paulo to Sydney. Welcome to Sleep Theories. If this is your first time joining us, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows that powerful people prefer to keep hidden. And now, let's descend into the redwoods of Northern California, where ancient trees witness modern horrors. Recovered journal entry, classification redacted. Subject: Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date range, July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location, Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The following document was recovered from an encrypted server farm in Iceland. The journalist's current whereabouts remain unknown. Ed. My name is Eli Granger, and I'm writing this because I may not live long enough to tell it in person. What I witnessed in the redwoods of Northern California will haunt me until my dying day, whenever that may come. It started 3 weeks ago with an email that shouldn't have existed. I was in my cramped Oakland apartment, nursing my third cup of coffee, and scrolling through encrypted channels where whistleblowers sometimes surface. My secure inbox pinged. A message from an address that was just a string of numbers and letters, routed through 7 different proxy servers. No subject line, just an attachment and 4 lines of text. You want truth? Go to the redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th to 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of what appeared to be a guest registry for the Bohemian Grove, that mysterious all-male retreat where the world's most powerful men allegedly gather each summer to commune with nature. I'd written about the Grove before, relying on second-hand accounts and leaked photographs from the 1980s, but this was different. The names on the list made my blood run cold. Former presidents, current senators, military contractors whose companies I'd been investigating for years, CEOs of tech giants, pharmaceutical corporations, defense contractors, media moguls who controlled the narrative of entire nations, all scheduled to attend something called the Midsummer Encampment. At the bottom of the scan was a forged access pass with my photograph, a professional headshot I'd never sent to anyone, digitally altered to show me in a black suit and tie. The name read Edmund Gray, Logistics Consultant, Prometheus Industries. Someone with serious resources wanted me inside that grove. The question was why? I should have walked away. Should have deleted the email and gone back to writing about municipal corruption and corporate tax avoidance. Safe stories. Stories that didn't get journalists killed. Instead, I packed a black suit and drove north to Sonoma County. The road to Monte Rio winds through some of the most beautiful country in California. Ancient redwoods tower over narrow highways, their canopy so thick that midday feels like twilight. It's the kind of place where you'd expect to find hippie communes and organic wineries, not shadowy cabals plotting the fate of nations. But as I learned in my Navy intelligence days, the most dangerous secrets are always hidden in the most innocent places. I parked at a motel in Gurneyville and walked the perimeter of the Bohemian Grove property that evening. 2,000 acres of private forest, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Security cameras every 50 feet, motion sensors in the trees, the kind of setup you'd expect around a military installation, not a summer camp for rich men. The main gate was staffed by guards who looked more like special forces operators than private security. Black uniforms, tactical gear, the flat stare of men who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Whatever happened inside those redwoods, they were serious about keeping it secret. The forged pass worked perfectly. Too perfectly. The guards scanned the barcode, checked my face against the photo, and waved me through without a second glance. Either the forger was a genius, or someone very powerful wanted me inside. Neither possibility was comforting. The grove itself was exactly as described in the leaked accounts I'd read. Massive redwood trees, some over 1,000 years old, stretched toward a canopy so thick it blocked out the sun. Gravel paths wound between rustic cabins and open-air lodges, each marked with whimsical names: Owl's Nest, Dragon's Den, Caveman's Lodge. It would have been charming if not for the underlying sense of wrongness that permeated everything. The other guests, I couldn't think of them as normal people, not after seeing that registry, moved through this camp with the easy confidence of men accustomed to absolute power. They wore casual clothes during the day, khakis, polo shirts, boat shoes, the uniform of American aristocracy. But their conversations, caught in fragments as I passed, revealed the true scope of their influence. The Shanghai Index will drop exactly 17%, Tell the secretary that Operation Nightfall is greenlit for October. Media blackout should hold for at least 72 hours. I posed as a logistics consultant, which gave me an excuse to wander the grounds with a clipboard and camera phone, confiscated at the gate and replaced with an approved device that couldn't access external networks. The cover story worked well enough. Rich men are accustomed to being served by invisible people who handle the mundane details of their lives. But as the day wore on, I began to notice the symbols. Owls everywhere, carved into tree trunks, etched on building facades, worked into the designs of benches and lampposts. Not cute, friendly owls. These were stylised, angular, with eyes that seemed to follow you as you walked past. The largest was a 40-foot stone statue positioned on a small island in an artificial lake at the heart of the grove. Even in daylight, it radiated a sense of ancient malevolence. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find a man in his 70s watching me stare at the giant owl. Silver hair, expensive casual wear, the kind of artificial tan that comes from winters in Palm Beach. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colourless. The owl of Bohemia, he continued, joining me at the lake's edge. Been watching over this place for over a century. Some say it's just decorative, others know better. Know better how? I asked, immediately regretting the question. I was supposed to be invisible, unremarkable. The old man smiled, revealing teeth too white and too perfect for his age. You'll see tonight, Mr. Grey. The Cremation of Care waits for no man, not even consultants. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring at the owl statue and wondering how much my cover had already been blown. That evening, as twilight settled over the grove, the atmosphere changed completely. The casual bonhomie of the day disappeared, replaced by something far more serious and ritualistic. Men emerged from their cabins wearing dark robes with hoods that obscured their faces. Some carried torches, others strange ceremonial objects I couldn't identify. I found a dark robe hanging in my assigned cabin, along with a note. Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all. What I witnessed that night will stay with me forever. As darkness fell, hundreds of robed figures processed through the forest paths, converging on the lake where the great owl statue loomed. Torches flickered between the trees like malevolent fireflies. The only sounds were footsteps on gravel and the whisper of fabric against bark. I followed the crowd, keeping my head down and my hood up. The robes smelled of incense and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. We gathered in a natural amphitheatre around the lake. The owl statue dominated the scene, its eyes seeming to glow red in the torchlight. A wooden boat had been prepared at the water's edge, and in it lay what appeared to be the effigy of a child, small, wrapped in white cloth, disturbingly lifelike. But as I stared at the bundle, a horrible doubt crept into my mind. The proportions were too perfect, the weight distribution too natural. The way the cloth clung to what lay beneath suggested something more substantial than straw and sawdust. A figure in an elaborate robe stepped onto a platform beside the owl. Even with his face hidden, I recognised the bearing and voice of a man who'd been on television every night for years. A former president whose policies had shaped a generation. Brothers of the Grove, his voice boomed across the water, amplified by hidden speakers. We gather once again beneath the ancient eyes of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burdens of conscience. The crowd responded in unison. We banish care and cast it to the flames. Care, that pale and common thing that binds the hands of power. Care that whispers doubt in the ears of decision. Care that stays the sword of necessary action. We banish care and cast it to the flames. The ritualised call and response continued for nearly an hour. Invocations to ancient deities whose names I recognised from my study of Middle Eastern mythology. Moloch, the Carthaginian god of child sacrifice. Enlil, the Mesopotamian lord of wind and authority. Names that shouldn't have been spoken by American leaders in the 21st century. But the most disturbing element wasn't the pagan imagery, or even the suggestions of child sacrifice. It was the casual way these men, titans of industry, shapers of policy, guardians of democracy, participated in rituals that explicitly celebrated the abandonment of human compassion. The ceremony reached its climax when the boat carrying the effigy was pushed out onto the lake. Flames erupted from the water around it, hidden gas jets, I realised, creating the illusion of supernatural fire. The figure in the boat burned quickly, the white cloth falling away to reveal... I still can't be certain what I saw. In the flickering light, with smoke obscuring my vision and my mind reeling from the horror of it all, it might have been an elaborately constructed mannequin. The realistic movement could have been caused by the flames consuming internal supports. The sounds, brief, high-pitched, quickly cut off, might have been air escaping from burning materials. But the way some of the robed figures wept as the fire consumed its offering, the way others cheered with genuine ecstasy, suggested something far more sinister than theatrical pageantry. As the flames died down, the crowd began to disperse. I started to follow them back toward the cabins, but a hand fell on my shoulder. Mr. Grey. It was the old man from earlier, still wearing his ceremonial robes. You're invited to the Inner Circle gathering, a rare honour for a consultant. Before I could refuse, two other figures flanked me. Not threatening exactly, but their presence made it clear that declining wasn't an option. They led me deeper into the forest, away from the main paths, to a clearing I hadn't seen during my earlier reconnaissance. Here, perhaps 30 men stood in a circle around a fire pit carved directly into the bedrock. Unlike the theatrical grandeur of the main ceremony, this felt ancient and deadly serious. The Inner Circle ritual began at midnight. The participants had exchanged their dark robes for masks of polished bone, owl faces with hollow eye sockets that seemed to bore into your soul. They moved with practiced precision, suggesting this ceremony had been performed countless times before. The man who'd led the earlier ritual stepped into the centre of the circle. Without his presidential bearing and familiar voice, he seemed diminished, just another acolyte serving powers older than nations. "Brothers of the Inner Grove," he intoned, "we gather to receive the wisdom of the Ancient Ones, and to consecrate the plans that will shape the world's destiny." The response came in a language I didn't recognise at first, harsh consonants and guttural vowels that seemed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to something primal and terrified in the human psyche. But as my Navy intelligence training kicked in, I began to parse familiar elements. This was Akkadian, the ancient language of Mesopotamia, dead for over 2,000 years. They were chanting the names of forgotten gods and promising them sacrifices of nations. Symbols were drawn in the ash around the fire pit, not random occult doodles, but specific sigils I recognised from declassified CIA documents. Project MK Ultra had experimented with ritualistic programming, using ancient symbols and dead languages to bypass conscious resistance in human subjects. The research had supposedly been discontinued in the 1970s. Apparently it had just moved to a more exclusive venue. The ceremony continued for hours. Maps were produced and spread on the ground, not of geographical territories, but of economic zones, resource deposits, population centres. Plans were discussed in mixture of English and Akkadian, but the intent was clear enough. Wars to be started, governments to be toppled, populations to be controlled. And through it all, the participants spoke of themselves not as American leaders serving American interests, but as servants of the Ancient Ones, preparing the world for some greater transformation. "The harvest approaches," one masked figure intoned. "The sleepers must be awakened. The old seals must be broken." "In the name of those who wait in the deep places," the circle responded, "let the work continue." I crouched in the shadows beyond the firelight, recording everything on a digital audio device I'd hidden in my shoe. But as the night wore on, I began to understand that what I was witnessing wasn't just corruption or conspiracy in any conventional sense. These men genuinely believed they were serving inhuman masters. Whether those masters were real or imagined didn't matter. The policies they were planning would affect millions of lives based on the whims of entities that viewed humanity as livestock. The ritual concluded with each participant drinking from a silver chalice and making individual pledges. The liquid looked black in the firelight, and several men convulsed briefly after drinking, their eyes rolling back to show only white. As dawn approached, the circle dissolved. The participants removed their masks, revealed themselves to be exactly who I'd suspected. Former presidents, current senators, military leaders, corporate titans. They shook hands and exchanged quiet words like businessmen concluding a profitable meeting, which in a sense they were. I made it back to my cabin as the first light filtered through the redwood canopy, but I knew I couldn't stay much longer. Whatever protection my forged identity provided was wearing thin. Too many meaningful looks, too many knowing smiles. They were playing with me, letting me see just enough to understand the scope of what I'd stumbled into. But there was one more place I needed to investigate before I could flee. The lodge marked Styx, access by code only, sat apart from the main camp, connected by a service road that didn't appear on any of the maps provided to guests. I'd noticed it during my first day's reconnaissance, but hadn't found an opportunity to investigate. The building itself was unremarkable. Standard wooden construction that matched the other lodges, designed to blend into the forest environment. But the security was anything but standard. Biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, motion sensors that could detect a heartbeat from 50 feet away. Fortunately, my anonymous benefactor had provided more than just a forged access pass. Hidden in the lining of my suit jacket was a USB device that looked like a standard thumb drive, but contained sophisticated hacking tools developed by someone with serious technical skills. When plugged into the lodge's security system, it created a temporary blind spot in the sensors and provided the access codes needed to bypass the locks. Whoever wanted me to see what lay inside had planned this infiltration down to the smallest detail. The lodge's interior was a facade. Behind a false wall accessed by yet another hidden panel, stairs led down into the bedrock beneath the forest. The passage was older than the buildings above, carved stone rather than modern construction, lit by electric fixtures that had been retrofitted into ancient sconces. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy oak door opened onto a chamber that took my breath away. The room stretched far beyond what should have been possible given the lodge's footprint above. Stone shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound journals, rolled documents, and artefacts that seemed to span centuries. At the centre of the chamber stood a massive table carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface covered with maps, blueprints, and what appeared to be governmental documents bearing official seals. I started with the journals, selecting one at random from a shelf marked 1923 to 1945. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, but the contents were anything but quaint. The European situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin understand their role, though they believe themselves to be serving the fatherland rather than the ancient ones. The sacrifice of the lesser peoples will provide the spiritual energy necessary for the next phase of the great work. Another journal, this one more recent. Operation Mockingbird exceeds all expectations. The media outlets respond to our guidance without question, believing they serve journalistic integrity, while actually perpetuating the narratives required for population control. The sleeping masses accept whatever reality we provide. But it was the documents on the central table that truly shattered my understanding of how the world worked. Blueprints for the USA Patriot Act dated 6 months before September 11, 2001. Battle plans for the invasion of Iraq, complete with fabricated intelligence reports about weapons of mass destruction. Early drafts of social media algorithms designed not to connect people, but to divide them into manageable, controllable factions. And newer documents that made my blood run cold. Plans for a global pandemic response that prioritized control over public health. Blueprints for digital currency systems that would eliminate financial privacy entirely. Population reduction strategies disguised as environmental initiatives. The most disturbing document was a roster of participants going back to the 1870s, when the Bohemian Club was first founded. Names I recognised from history textbooks, titans of the Gilded Age who'd shaped America's industrial development. But also names that shouldn't have been there. Figures from much earlier periods, some dating back centuries. Either the record keeping was fantastically inaccurate, or some of these participants weren't entirely human. At the bottom of the most recent page, a note in fresh handwriting. E. Granger, Journalist. Witnessed Inner Circle Ceremony. July 16th, 2023. Asset or liability. Recommend termination if no compliance by dawn July 18th. They knew exactly who I was, had known from the moment I'd walked through their gates, the anonymous email, the forged pass, the convenient access codes. It had all been an elaborate test, and I was apparently failing. A motion sensor somewhere in the chamber beeped softly. Red lights began flashing along the walls. In the distance I could hear the sound of heavy footsteps descending the stone stairs. I grabbed as many documents as I could carry, stuffed them into my jacket and looked for another way out. But there was only one exit, and it was about to be filled with very unfriendly people. The footsteps were getting closer. Voices echoed down the stairwell. Professional, clipped. The kind of tactical communication used by military operators. But then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in hellish red. And in that brief moment of darkness, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. A voice speaking directly into my mind, words that bypassed my ears entirely. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen. But know that the telling will be your doom, and the world's salvation requires far greater sacrifices than one man's life. When the emergency light stabilised, a section of the stone wall had opened, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the earth. I didn't hesitate. Whatever entity had just spoken to me, whether it was one of the ancient ones or something else entirely, it was offering me a chance to escape. I took it. The tunnel system beneath the grove was extensive and clearly ancient. Carved passages connected natural caves, creating a network that probably extended for miles underground. The walls were covered with symbols similar to those I'd seen during the Inner Circle ceremony, but these were older, deeper, worn smooth by centuries of whatever had moved through these spaces. I followed the main passage for what felt like hours, guided by phosphorescent moss that provided just enough light to avoid the worst obstacles. Behind me, I could hear sounds of pursuit, voices, flashlight beams, the occasional echo of radio communication. But the sounds were growing fainter, suggesting that my pursuers either couldn't find the tunnel entrance or were reluctant to follow me into the deep places beneath the forest. Eventually the passage began to slope upward. Fresh air carried the scent of rain and growing things. A natural opening concealed by hanging vines led out into the forest several miles from the main grove compound. I emerged to find the sky filled with storm clouds. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. Perfect cover for an escape, if I could make it to my car before the Grove's security forces expanded their search perimeter. But as I made my way through the forest, I realised I wasn't alone. Figures moved between the trees, not the tactical teams I'd expected, but something far stranger. They wore the bone-white owl masks from the Inner Circle ceremony, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, too precise. And their eyes glowed with a faint bioluminescence that had nothing to do with reflected light. "The journalist sees too much," one of them said, the words somehow audible despite the increasing thunder. "The ancient ones are displeased." "But the compact must be honoured," another replied. "He was brought here for a purpose. Let him carry the message to the outer world. Let them know what awaits." I ran. Behind me, inhuman laughter echoed through the forest. Not pursuit exactly, but something far more unsettling. The sound of predators who were confident their prey could never truly escape. I reached my rental car as the storm broke in earnest. Rain pounded the windshield as I drove through the night, taking back roads and avoiding the main highways. In my jacket pocket, the stolen documents felt like they were burning against my chest. But I'd made it out. I had evidence. I had proof of the conspiracy that shaped world events from the shadows of a California forest. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to an offshore server farm in Iceland. Documents, audio recordings, photographs, detailed notes of everything I'd witnessed. Multiple backup copies, distributed through anonymous networks, protected by military-grade encryption. Within 6 hours, every file had been corrupted or deleted. My apartment was ransacked while I was at an internet cafe, uploading the files. Nothing obviously stolen, but every electronic device had been confiscated or destroyed. My laptop, phone, backup drives, even the digital camera I'd left in a drawer, all gone. The mainstream media ignored my story completely. Alternative news sites that initially showed interest suddenly went silent. Forum posts about the Grove were deleted within minutes of being posted. It was as if the entire internet had been scrubbed of any reference to what I'd discovered. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night since my escape, I've been visited by visions of the Ancient Ones, vast, tentacled entities that exist in spaces between dimensions, feeding on human suffering and preparing for some cosmic transformation that will remake reality according to their twisted desires. They show me glimpses of the future they're working to create. Cities drowned beneath black oceans, skies filled with screaming winds, populations reduced to cattle serving inhuman masters. And they whisper that I'm not a hero or a journalist or even a victim. I'm a messenger. They wanted someone to witness their ceremony, to understand the scope of their power, to carry word of their inevitable victory to the outside world. Not to warn humanity. Warnings imply the possibility of resistance, but to spread the despair that will make their final conquest easier. Every word I write, every person I tell, every attempt to expose the truth only serves their greater purpose. The corruption of hope, the murder of faith in human institutions, the slow transformation of free people into willing slaves. I'm writing this final entry from a motel room in Reno. I've been driving for 3 days, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. But I know it doesn't matter. They're not hunting me because they don't need to. I'm already serving their purpose just by existing, just by remembering what I saw in the Grove. The Cremation of Care wasn't just a ritual, it was a recruitment ceremony. And I wasn't an infiltrator, I was an initiate. Tonight, I'll drive east toward the desert. Maybe I'll find some way to break the cycle, to turn their own trap against them. Or maybe I'll just disappear into the wasteland and let the truth die with me. But if you're reading this, if somehow these words have reached you despite all their efforts to control the flow of information, then remember this. They call it the Cremation of Care, but what they really burn is conscience. And when the fires die down, the world grows a little colder, a little darker, a little more ready for the Ancient Ones to reclaim what they consider their rightful dominion. The fire in the Grove never really goes out. It just spreads, invisible and inexorable, consuming everything human until only the shadows remain. And in those shadows something very old and very hungry is waiting to be born. Hello night wanderers and digital truth seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope your day treated you well. What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening from a bustling city, a quiet suburb, or perhaps somewhere far off the grid? Wherever you are in this connected yet disconnected world, you've found your way to Sleep Theories, the place where we explore the stories that keep us awake at night. If this tale resonates with you, or if you simply enjoy having your reality questioned at 2 a.m, consider subscribing. We're building a community of those who dare to look behind the digital curtain. Now, settle in. Tonight's story is about 4 people who discovered something they were never meant to find. The retired military satellite KH-14B hadn't been active for 3 years. Officially decommissioned after budget cuts forced the Pentagon to consolidate their orbital surveillance network. So when Nova Chen's custom frequency scanner picked up an encrypted data burst routing through its dormant transponder at 3:47 a.m, she knew someone was playing with fire. "Lynx, you need to see this," she calls across the converted warehouse that serves as their operations centre. The space looks like a digital graveyard. Servers humming in stacks, Screens casting blue light across walls covered in network diagrams and corporate org charts connected by red string. Welcome to the underground. Lynx Rodriguez slides his chair over, steam rising from his fourth cup of coffee. At 32, his face carries the weight of someone who's seen the machinery of power from the inside. Former NSA turned whistleblower turned ghost. What's the signature? Military-grade encryption, but it's using deprecated protocols. Whoever sent this wanted it to look old, forgotten. Nova's fingers dance across 3 keyboards simultaneously. But the timestamp is fresh. Someone's using dead satellites to hide active communications. Jax looks up from their corner workstation, purple hair catching the monitor glow. How fresh! 15 minutes ago. The warehouse falls silent except for the eternal hum of cooling fans. Professor Kale emerges from the makeshift lab in the back corner, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. At 58, he's the oldest member of their group, a disgraced virologist whose career ended when he asked too many questions about certain pandemic-era research protocols. "Did you crack it?" Kale asks, approaching with the careful steps of someone who's learned to expect bad news. Nova's screen fills with cascading code as her decryption algorithms chew through layers of obfuscation. Almost. There. The file materializes. Project Aegis 2030.enx. Aegis, Lynx mutters. That's not good. Aegis was a classified program I remember from my NSA days. Theoretical population management scenarios. Theoretical, Nova repeats, clicking open the file. Let's see how theoretical it still is. The document unfolds across her screen like a digital autopsy report. Code fragments, data tables, implementation timelines. Her eyes scan the contents, and her expression shifts from curiosity to confusion to something approaching horror. "Guys," she says, her voice dropping to a whisper, "this isn't about surveillance, this isn't about control." Jack spins their chair around. "What is it about?" Nova's hands tremble slightly as she highlights a section of code. Variables with names like fertility, reduction, vectors, genetic selection, protocols, and population ceiling enforcement. "It's about extinction," she breathes. "Mass vaccination campaigns, supply chain disruptions, climate-based selection zones." She reads directly from the screen. Phase implementation. Reduce global population to sustainable levels through coordinated biological and environmental interventions. Target timeline 2030. Acceptable retention rate 6 to 8% of current population. The silence stretches like a held breath. 6 to 8%, Kyle repeats slowly, of 7 billion people. "That's not population control," Link says, his intelligence training kicking in as he processes the implications. "That's genocide with a spreadsheet." Nova scrolls deeper into the document, her face pale in the monitor light. "There's more. Listen to this. This initiative represents a fundamental reset of the human species. Traditional methods of population management through war, famine, and disease have proven insufficient to address the accelerating resource depletion crisis. Project Aegis represents a coordinated approach to ensure species survival through selective reduction." "Species survival?" Jax echoes. "They're talking about us like we're livestock." "No," Nova corrects, her voice hollow. "Livestock are valuable. We're weeds they want to clear from the garden." Kale sits down heavily, his scientific mind wrestling with the implications. During his years researching virology, he'd seen enough classified projects to know that the line between theoretical and operational could be crossed with a single authorization signature. "We need to verify this," he says finally. "Cross-reference with known programs, trace the source, build a complete picture. If this is real," Nova finishes, "we're looking at the greatest crime in human history, and it's already begun." Lynx pulls up his contacts, a carefully maintained network of sources still embedded in various intelligence agencies. "I'll reach out to my people, see what chatter I can pick up." "I'll dig into the technical specifications," Jax offers. "These code fragments reference specific biological agents. If they're using existing research, there'll be traces in academic databases." Nova saves the file to their secure server and begins setting up multiple backup protocols. "Professor, we need you to analyze the biological components. Your expertise might be the key to understanding how they plan to implement this." As the team disperses to their workstations, the weight of their discovery settles over the warehouse like digital smoke. They've stumbled across something that wasn't meant for human eyes, a blueprint for the end of the world as they know it. Outside, the city sleeps on, unaware that 4 people in a converted warehouse have just glimpsed the future, and it looks like a graveyard with Wi-Fi. Nova stares at the file name blinking on her screen, Project Aegis 2030.nc. In mythology, Aegis was the shield of Zeus, the divine protection for the gods. But protection for whom? And protection from what? As she begins her deep dive into the data, one phrase keeps echoing in her mind from the document's executive summary. This isn't about control, it's about resetting the species. The countdown, she realises, isn't to some distant apocalypse. It's to tomorrow. 3 days of sleepless research have transformed their warehouse into a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Every wall now displays interconnected timelines, corporate hierarchies, and data flowcharts that would make a forensic accountant weep. Nova hasn't left the building since they cracked the Aegis file, surviving on instant ramen and the kind of caffeine-fueled determination that borders on religious fervour. "I found the breadcrumbs," she announces, her voice hoarse from exhaustion, and chain-smoking cigarettes she bummed from Lynx. The World Population Summit in Cairo, 1994. Most people remember it as a boring UN conference about reproductive rights and sustainable development. She pulls up archived documents on the main display screen, official transcripts, media reports, diplomatic cables, standard bureaucratic theatre. But look what happens when you dig into the closed-door sessions. A classified document appears, heavily redacted but with enough visible text to tell a story. The header reads, Adaptive Earth Framework, Preliminary Implementation Strategies. Cale adjusts his glasses, squinting at the screen. I remember this conference. I was a graduate student then, writing my dissertation on population genetics. There were rumours about private sessions, but nobody talked about what was discussed, Nova finishes. Except someone did. Deep in the diplomatic archives, buried under 17 layers of classification, I found this. She highlights passages that make the room's temperature seem to drop. Non-essential demographic drift must be addressed through coordinated intervention. Genetic dead zones present opportunity for selective resource allocation. Acceptable fallout parameters established at 85 to 90% reduction over 2-generation cycle. Project requires integration of medical, agricultural and environmental vectors. Jax looks up from their workstation, where they've been cross-referencing pharmaceutical patents. Nova, you need to see this. Those medical vectors they mention. I've been tracking the patent filings, and there's a pattern. They throw their research onto the shared screen. Dozens of pharmaceutical patents filed between 2018 and 2023, all connected to a web of shell companies, all related to mRNA modification technology. But here's the weird part, Jax continues. These patents aren't just for vaccines. They're for genetic modification systems that can be activated remotely, dormant until triggered by specific environmental factors. Cale's face goes pale. That's not possible. The technology to create delayed activation genetic modifications didn't exist in 2018, Jax agrees, but it does now. And according to these patents, it's been deployed. Nova pulls up another document from their Aegis cache. Remember, Professor, you mentioned seeing strange compounds in vaccine trials during the pandemic? Trials with non-public results? Cale nods slowly. There were inconsistencies. Control groups that should have shown specific immune responses but didn't. Novel proteins that had no apparent therapeutic function. When I raised concerns, you were discredited and forced out, Nova says. They called you a conspiracy theorist. Because I was asking the wrong questions, Cale realises. I was looking for immediate effects, but if these compounds were designed for delayed activation... Link slides his chair over, holding a printout of classified communications he's pulled from the old NSA databases. I've been digging through archived surveillance reports. Remember how during the pandemic, certain rural areas had unusually high vaccination rates, areas that normally resist federal health initiatives. He spreads out a map showing vaccination distribution patterns across the United States. Strange clusters appear in seemingly random locations. Rural counties in Montana, farming communities in Iowa, small towns along the Appalachian Trail. These aren't random, Nova says, studying the pattern. They're systematic. Someone was targeting specific populations. Or specific genetic profiles, Kale adds quietly. Jax's workstation chimes with an alert. Guys, I've been monitoring dark web chatter about unusual health trends. Look at this. They project a series of forum posts, social media reports, and medical anomalies from the past 6 months. Unexplained fertility drops in rural communities. Unusual autoimmune responses in adults aged 25 to 45. Regional variations in birth defects that don't match known environmental factors. Agricultural workers reporting mysterious illnesses that don't respond to standard treatments. Nova connects the dots on their shared display, drawing lines between vaccination sites, health anomalies, and demographic data. The pattern that emerges looks like a slow-motion biological weapon detonating across the landscape. They weren't just treating viruses, she says, echoing Kale's earlier words. They were treating the future human genome. Lynx pulls up another classified document, this one from a more recent surveillance operation. There's more. I found references to something called genetic compatibility mapping in Department of Homeland Security briefings. They've been collecting DNA samples through routine medical procedures and cross-referencing them with... He stops, staring at the screen. With what? Nova prompts. With survival probability models, he finishes. They're not just tracking who might survive their selective reduction. They're actively identifying who they want to eliminate. The warehouse falls silent as the implications settle over them like digital ash. They're not just looking at a conspiracy, they're looking at the implementation phase of humanity's final exam. And most of the class is about to fail. Kale stands up slowly, his scientific mind finally accepting what his moral instincts have been screaming. We need to understand the full scope. If they've weaponized the medical system, the agricultural system, the environmental monitoring system, then they've turned civilization itself into a weapon, Nova completes. As if summoned by their conversation, Jax's monitoring systems light up with alerts. Encrypted traffic spike on the satellite networks, same routing pattern as the original Aegis transmission. Nova rushes to her decryption station. They're talking again. If we can intercept this... The file downloads slowly, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. When it finally opens, it's not code this time. It's a video conference recording. Meeting minutes, Lynx realizes, from yesterday. Nova's hand hovers over the play button. Once they watch this, there's no going back. No pretending they stumbled across theoretical documents or academic exercises. Whatever's on this recording, she says, it's going to show us who's behind this, and what comes next. She clicks play. The screen fills with faces they recognise from news broadcasts and magazine covers. World leaders, tech billionaires, pharmaceutical executives, and scientists, all sitting around a virtual conference table discussing the end of the world with the casual tone of a quarterly earnings call. And in the corner of the screen, a countdown timer. 18 months, 14 days, 7 hours, 23 minutes. The clock is ticking, and they're about to learn exactly what happens when it reaches 0. The video quality is surprisingly good for something intercepted from a rerouted satellite signal. Crystal clear audio, HD resolution, perfect lighting. Almost as if whoever recorded this wanted it to be found by someone with the right skills and motivation. Nova adjusts the audio levels as familiar faces fill the screen. She recognises at least half of them. Pharmaceutical CEOs who've been in the news, tech moguls who've testified before Congress, government officials whose names appear in leaked documents weekly. But it's the people she doesn't recognise that worry her more. Faces that suggest power operates in layers the public never sees. Audio check, a voice says off-screen. We're recording for the archive. All participants have been verified through biometric confirmation. Proceed with briefing, responds a woman Nova recognises as the director of the World Health Organization. Phase 3 implementation status. A man in his 60s, distinguished silver hair, appears in a separate window. The nameplate reads, Doctor, Harrison Vale, Protean Core Industries. Nova makes a mental note. She's never heard of Protean Core, which means they've done excellent work staying invisible. Phase 3 is proceeding on schedule, Dr. Vale reports. Biometric surveillance systems are now operational in 847 rural zones across 17 countries. Heat mapping, fertility tracking, and genetic sequencing capabilities are running at full capacity. Jax pauses their other work to focus on the video. Genetic sequencing? That's not something you can do remotely. Unless, Kale says slowly, you've already collected samples through other means. On screen, Dr. Vale continues. Integration with consumer health devices has exceeded projections. Voluntary data submission through fitness trackers, smartphones, and IoT medical devices now covers 73% of target demographics in developed nations. Nova feels her blood turn cold. She looks at the fitness tracker on her own wrist, a gift from her sister 2 Christmases ago. The little device that's been monitoring her heart rate, sleep patterns, stress levels. The device that connects to her phone, which connects to the cloud, which connects to... Smart device penetration in rural areas remains challenging, Dr. Vale continues, but our partnerships with agricultural technology companies have provided alternative collection methods. Genetic material harvested through routine veterinary procedures on livestock has proven surprisingly effective for human population mapping. What the hell does that mean? Jax whispers. Kale's face has gone ashen. Cross-species genetic contamination. If they're introducing human genetic markers into livestock, then tracking the animal genetics. They can map human populations through the food chain, Nova finishes. Every hamburger, every glass of milk, every piece of chicken carries genetic data. On screen, the meeting continues. A younger man, maybe 40, appears in a new window. His nameplate reads, Marcus Chen, Global Agricultural Systems. Nova notices the shared surname but feels no family connection, only revulsion. Agricultural vector deployment is exceeding expectations, Marcus reports. mRNA modification systems are now integrated into feed supplies for cattle, poultry and swine across North America and Europe. Human consumption data indicates 94% population exposure through dietary intake. Side effects, asks the WHO director. Minimal immediate impact as designed. However, fertility rates in test regions are down 23% year over year, with accelerating decline patterns. Autoimmune responses are appearing within expected parameters. Nova's hands shake as she realises what they're watching. These aren't plans being discussed. These are progress reports on operations already in motion. Lynx leans closer to the screen. That voice. I know that voice. A new participant joins the call, their video window appearing in the centre of the screen. The image is deliberately obscured. Shadows and lighting designed to hide identity. But the voice is clear and authoritative. Psychological conditioning remains our most effective vector, the shadowed figure reports. Media saturation campaigns have successfully normalised concepts of population reduction, climate-based selection, and voluntary extinction movements. Social media algorithms are amplifying despair, hopelessness, and anti-natalist sentiment across target demographics. Mental fatigue campaigns, the WHO director asks, exceeding projections. Suicide rates in target age ranges are up 34% year over year. Birth rates continue declining as planned. Most importantly, resistance to authority has decreased significantly. Population compliance with future directives is expected to be near universal. Jack stands up abruptly, knocking over their chair. They're not just poisoning our bodies, they're poisoning our minds. Nova pauses the video, needing a moment to process what they're witnessing. This isn't just biological warfare. It's psychological, social, environmental. They've weaponized everything we depend on to survive. Food, air, water, information, Lynx lists. They're not attacking civilization. They've turned civilization into the weapon. Kale sits down heavily, his scientific worldview crumbling and reforming around this new reality. The fertility decline, the autoimmune disorders, the psychological depression epidemics, it's all connected. It's all intentional. Nova resumes the video. The shadowed figure continues speaking. Phase 4. Preparation is nearly complete. Environmental triggers are in position. When activated, they will catalyse the biological modifications already present in target populations. Estimated timeline for full effect 18 months. The WHO director nods. Excellent. What about resistance potential? Minimal. Independent researchers who've approached relevant discoveries have been discredited, defunded, or eliminated from academic and professional positions. Media coverage of related topics has been successfully redirected toward established conspiracy theory frameworks, ensuring any accurate information is dismissed as paranoid delusion. Nova feels the walls of their warehouse closing in. How many others have found pieces of this puzzle? How many have been silenced? Dr. Vale, the shadowed figure continues. Status report on asset protection. Dr. Vale reappears on screen. Protection protocols are operational. All essential personnel and their families have received modified treatments. Genetic compatibility with post-implementation environment is confirmed. We estimate a protected population of approximately 500,000 globally. 500,000, Jax repeats numbly, out of 7 billion. The video quality starts to degrade as the satellite connection becomes unstable, but one final exchange comes through clearly. Any concerns about detection? Unlikely. The full scope of the operation requires integration of data from medical, agricultural, environmental, technological and psychological sources. No single research team or intelligence agency has access to all vectors simultaneously. Except, the WHO director adds with something approaching dark humour, they would need to be simultaneously expert in cryptography, intelligence gathering, virology, social engineering, and information systems. The shadowed figure laughs. The probability of such a team existing with access to the right data and the motivation to pursue it is essentially zero. The connection dies, leaving their warehouse in silence. Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kael look at each other across the digital evidence of humanity's planned extinction. Well, Nova says finally, I guess we're essentially zero. But as the four of them return to their workstations, preparing to dive deeper into the nightmare they have uncovered, none of them notice the small indicator light on Jax's communication system. The light that shows someone has been monitoring their network traffic. The light that means their essentially zero probability team has just become a confirmed threat. The light that means Phase 4 might be starting ahead of schedule. The warehouse's early warning system starts screaming at 4:17 a.m, 3 hours after they finished analysing the intercepted conference call. Nova jolts awake from her desk, where she'd fallen asleep reviewing genetic modification patents. The screens around her flash red as multiple intrusion detection systems trigger simultaneously. "Lynx!" she shouts, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. "We've got company!" Lynx rolls out of his sleeping bag, grabbing his laptop and a go bag he keeps permanently packed, old habits from his intelligence days. "What kind of company?" "The kind that uses military-grade network penetration tools," Nova responds, her fingers flying across keyboards as she tries to lock down their systems. "Someone's been watching us." Jax appears from the back room, purple hair messy from sleep but their eyes sharp with focus. "How long have they been in our network?" "Unknown," Nova admits, fighting a losing battle against the intrusion. "But they've got root access to our communication systems. They've seen everything." Kael emerges from his makeshift lab, clutching a hard drive. "I've backed up all the biological data to an isolated system. If we lose the main servers..." "We're losing everything," Nova confirms, watching as file after file disappears from their local storage. They're not just infiltrating, they're sanitizing, removing all traces of what we've found. But even as their digital fortress crumbles around them, Nova's mind races ahead to their backup protocols. Years of paranoia have taught her to prepare for exactly this scenario. "Jax, activate the mesh network. Lynx, get the satellite uplink ready. We're going distributed." The warehouse transforms as hidden systems come online. What appeared to be a simple hacker den reveals itself as a sophisticated intelligence operation. Jax's workstation unfolds into a multi-array communication hub. Lynx produces equipment that definitely didn't come from civilian sources. Nova's desk reveals hidden servers and backup power systems. "Professor," Nova calls, "how much of your research is stored offline?" "Everything critical," Kael confirms. "I learned not to trust cloud storage after they destroyed my academic career." As their attackers continue dismantling their main systems, the team executes an evacuation protocol they've rehearsed, but hoped never to use. Critical files transfer to multiple secure locations. Communication channels shift to encrypted networks. Physical evidence gets packed into go bags. But Nova isn't running yet. Instead, she's doing something that would seem insane to anyone who doesn't understand her particular brand of digital warfare. She's tracing the intrusion back to its source. "What are you doing?" Lynx demands, watching her work as alarms continue screaming around them. "If they're watching us," Nova says through gritted teeth, "then we're watching them back." Her screen fills with a network traffic analysis, packet traces, and routing information. The attack is sophisticated, routed through multiple proxy servers and anonymization networks. But sophistication creates complexity, and complexity creates vulnerabilities. There, she breathes, highlighting a data stream. They're not just stealing our files, they're uploading something. The upload completes just as Nova isolates the data stream, a single file placed carefully in their system logs where it would be discovered during any forensic analysis. Child pornography, Lynx realizes, reading the file metadata. They're setting us up when law enforcement finds this place. We'll be dismissed as perverts and criminals instead of researchers, Nova finishes. Brilliant. Completely discredit us while making sure no one looks too closely at what we actually found. But Nova's trace has revealed something else, the real location of their attackers, and it's not some anonymous hacker collective or foreign government. They're operating out of the Protean Core building, she announces. Dr. Harrison Vale's company, the same people we watched discussing humanity's extinction 3 hours ago. Jax finishes packing their equipment. We need to leave, now. But Nova is still working, her fingers moving with the desperate speed of someone who knows this might be their last chance. Not yet. If they're monitoring us in real time, if they know what we've discovered, then they know we're a threat, which means... Her screen fills with a new data stream. Not an attack this time, but intercepted communications from the Protean Core building. They're having an emergency meeting, she realizes, right now, about us. She patches the audio through their speakers, and suddenly the warehouse fills with voices they recognize from the earlier recording. Confirmed they have the Phase 3 documentation, Dr. Vale's voice reports. Full technical specifications, implementation timelines, biological modification protocols. How is that possible? The WHO director's voice sounds strained. That information is compartmentalized across 17 different security classifications. Unknown, but their research capabilities suggest state-level intelligence resources. We may have a coordinated opposition. A new voice joins the call, the shadowed figure from the earlier recording, though now speaking with urgent authority rather than calm confidence. Irrelevant. They know enough to compromise the entire operation if they go public. We need immediate containment. What kind of containment? Dr. Vale asks. Total. The team, their research, their facility. Make it look like a lab accident. Chemical fire, explosion, whatever ensures complete evidence destruction. Nova's blood turns to ice as she realizes what they're planning. How long do we have? The WHO director asks. Tactical team is en route, 20 minutes. Nova starts shutting down systems, her movements sharp with controlled panic. We're blown. They're sending a kill team. 20 minutes? Jax checks their watch. That's not enough time to... It's enough time to do one thing, Nova interrupts, pulling up her final contingency protocol. We can't save ourselves, but we can save the evidence. She begins uploading their complete research archive to a decentralized network. Blockchain-based storage systems that can't be deleted or controlled by any single authority. But the upload is massive, and their internet connection is already compromised. Upload time, 17 minutes, her system reports. 3 minutes to spare, Link says grimly, checking his weapons, if their timeline is accurate. But as if summoned by his words, new alarms start screaming. Motion sensors around the warehouse perimeter. Thermal imaging detecting multiple vehicles approaching from different directions. They lied about the timeline, Nova realizes. The team is already here. Through the grimy windows, they can see black SUVs surrounding the building. Tactical lights sweep across the walls. Radio chatter echoes from outside, professional, coordinated, lethal. Upload progress, 32%, her computer announces. Nova looks at her team. Her friends, her fellow travellers in the digital underground. Jax with their fierce intelligence and boundless optimism. Lynx with his warrior's honour and protective instincts. Kale with his scientist's dedication to truth above comfort. I need 8 more minutes to finish the upload, she says quietly. Can you give me 8 minutes? Lynx checks his rifle, the same model he carried during his government service. Against a professional tactical team? In an indefensible position? He looks around the warehouse, their home, their sanctuary, their last stand. Yeah, he says finally, we can give you 8 minutes. As the first breaching charges explode against the warehouse doors, Nova's fingers continue dancing across her keyboard, uploading humanity's final testimony to the digital wind. Outside, boots pound against concrete and orders are shouted in tactical shorthand. Inside, 4 people who stumbled across the end of the world fight to make sure someone, somewhere, will know what really happened to the human race. The upload bar crawls toward completion, 47%, 48%. Sasipgu Peosentu, and in the distance sirens wail, though whether they're coming to help or to clean up the mess, nobody can tell. Upload progress, 73%. Nova's fingers move across the keyboard with mechanical precision, even as automatic weapons fire tears through the warehouse's steel walls. Lynx and Jax have improvised a defensive position behind stacked servers, returning fire with a small arsenal Lynx maintained for exactly this scenario. Kyle crouches beside Nova, clutching his backup drives like sacred relics. "How much longer?" Lynx shouts over the gunfire, ejecting an empty magazine. 3 minutes, Nova responds, sweat dripping onto her keyboard as she maintains the upload connection, despite power fluctuations from damaged systems. A tactical team member appears at a broken window. Jax takes him down with a shot that would make their grandfather proud. The same grandfather who taught them to shoot cans off fence posts in rural Oregon, never imagining his lessons would one day be used to defend the future of human civilization. Upload progress, 81%. "Nova!" Kyle shouts, pointing at the main screen. "They're jamming our satellite connection." She looks up to see their upload speed dropping rapidly. The decentralized network storage is failing as targeted electromagnetic pulses disrupt their communication arrays. Years of preparation, layers of redundancy, multiple backup systems, all being systematically neutralized by an enemy who understands their capabilities better than they understand themselves. "Switch to the hardline," she orders, pulling cables from emergency ports hidden beneath the floor. "If the satellites are down, we go terrestrial." But even as she reroutes their connection through buried fibre optic cables, her screens show the truth. Their attackers aren't just soldiers. They're technicians, equipped with signal intelligence gear and digital warfare tools. This isn't a military assault, it's a surgical data extraction and elimination operation. Upload progress, 89%. They're inside the network, Nova realizes, watching as files begin corrupting during transfer. They're not jamming the connection, they're poisoning it. Malicious code floods through their internet connection, targeting not just their local systems, but the destination servers themselves. Wherever they try to upload their evidence, the same destructive algorithms follow, erasing data as fast as they can transmit it. 90 seconds, Lynx reports, reloading his rifle. "That's all I can give you." Nova's mind races through alternatives. Local storage, compromised. Cloud servers, compromised. Peer-to-peer networks, compromised. Everywhere they turn, the digital tentacles of their enemies have already reached. But there's one option they haven't tried. One network that exists outside the normal channels of internet communication. "Jax!" she shouts. "Emergency radio protocols. Can you reach the ham radio networks?" Jax nods, understanding immediately. While their enemies have prepared for digital warfare, they might not have anticipated analog communication methods, ancient radio technology that predates the internet by decades. As Jax frantically assembles radio equipment, Nova begins compressing their data files into formats suitable for audio transmission. Everything they've discovered about Project Aegis, the population reduction protocols, the biological modification systems, compressed into digital packets that can be transmitted over shortwave radio frequencies. Upload progress, 94%. Transmission corrupted. Their internet connection dies completely as electromagnetic pulse weapons finish destroying their communication arrays. But Jax's radio equipment sparks to life, connecting them to a network of amateur radio operators who maintain communication protocols independent of corporate or government control. "This is Emergency Station Alpha calling CQ Emergency," Jax broadcasts. "We have critical data for immediate relay to all stations. Repeat, critical data for immediate relay." Responses crackle back from radio operators across the country. Retired engineers, electronics hobbyists, disaster relief volunteers. People who maintain the last truly free communication network on the planet. Nova begins transmitting their compressed data files, sending fragments to different radio operators with instructions for reassembly and distribution. It's slow, inefficient and incomplete, but it's working. Until the lights go out. Emergency power kicks in, bathing the warehouse in red light as their main electrical systems fail. Through the broken windows they can see technicians working on power lines, systematically isolating the building from the electrical grid. "They're cutting everything," Kale observes. "Power, internet, Radio frequency spectrum, complete communication isolation. Nova's laptop switched to battery power, giving her perhaps 10 minutes of operation before total system failure. She continues transmitting data packets over Jax's radio equipment, but the process is agonizingly slow. "Nova!" Lynx calls urgently. "Movement on the roof. They're coming through the skylights." She looks up to see tactical team members rappelling through the warehouse's ceiling. Professional, coordinated, equipped with night vision and thermal imaging. In 30 seconds, they'll have complete control of the space. In 30 seconds, Project Aegis will remain humanity's best-kept secret. But Nova has one final option. One last desperate gambit that violates every principle of operational security she's ever followed. She activates her personal phone's livestream function and begins broadcasting directly to social media. "My name is Nova Chen," she says, looking directly into the camera as gunfire echoes around her. "If you're watching this, you need to know that the world's governments and corporations are planning to kill most of the human race." Her phone screen shows viewer counts climbing rapidly. Hundreds, then thousands of people drawn by the chaos and violence of her livestream. They call it Project Aegis, population reduction through biological modification. They've poisoned the vaccines, contaminated the food supply, weaponized the environmental monitoring systems. Tactical team members breach their defensive position. Lynx falls, blood spreading across the concrete floor. Jax continues working the radio, transmitting data even as red laser sights dance across their chest. "The timeline is 18 months, Nova continues, holding the phone steady despite the chaos. "They've already begun implementation. If you've been vaccinated, if you eat processed food, if you use smart devices, you're already carrying the biological modifications they need to." A tactical team member's rifle butt smashes into her skull, sending the phone spinning across the concrete floor. The livestream continues, showing a sideways view of combat boots and spreading pools of blood, but the damage is done. In the 3 minutes her stream was active, over 50,000 people watched Nova Chen's final testimony. And in the age of social media, 50,000 becomes 5 million in a matter of hours. The last thing her phone's camera captures before the screen goes black is a gloved hand reaching down to pick it up. In the background, a voice speaks with calm authority. "Sanitize everything. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace this facility ever existed." Then static, then silence, then nothing. 6 months later. The official report from the Woodland Fire Department described it as a tragic industrial accident. Improper storage of chemical solvents in a converted warehouse led to an explosion that killed 4 squatters and destroyed the building completely. Local news covered it for exactly 1 day before moving on to more compelling stories. The livestream that briefly appeared on various social media platforms was quickly removed for violating community guidelines against violent content and misinformation. Users who tried to share or discuss it found their accounts suspended or shadow banned. Within a week it had been scrubbed from mainstream platforms entirely. But the internet remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wants forgotten. On encrypted message boards and dark web forums, fragments of Nova's final broadcast circulate like digital samizdat. Grainy screenshots, audio clips, transcribed quotes passed from user to user through carefully maintained networks of paranoid technologists and dedicated conspiracy researchers. Truthseeker 2030 posts on an anonymous forum. Anyone else remember that warehouse livestream from 6 months ago? The girl talking about Project Aegis? Can't find it anywhere now, but I swear I downloaded a copy. Digital Ghost responds. Had the same video. File corrupted when I tried to open it last week. All my Aegis research just disappeared, like it was never there. Red Pill Reality chimes in. Same here. But I remember what she said. Population reduction, biological modifications, food supply contamination, 18 months. We're down to 12 months now. The conversations multiply across platforms that exist in the shadows of the normal internet. Ham radio operators share fragments of the data Jax transmitted in those final minutes. Academic researchers quietly compare notes about unusual patterns in pharmaceutical trials and agricultural modifications. Environmental scientists notice anomalies that match the warnings from a warehouse that officially never existed. Dr. Sarah Martinez, epidemiologist at UC Davis, publishes a paper about unexplained fertility decline in rural agricultural communities. She doesn't mention Project Aegis directly, but her data matches the patterns Nova's team identified with unsettling accuracy. Professor David Kim at MIT releases research about novel proteins found in certain vaccine batches, proteins with no apparent therapeutic function. His funding gets cut 3 weeks later, and his department chair suggests he focus on less controversial research topics. Environmental journalist Lisa Chen, no relation to Nova despite the shared surname, investigates reports of unusual biometric surveillance equipment appearing in remote areas. Her article gets killed by her editor, who explains that the magazine's parent company has concerns about unfounded conspiracy theories. But each cancelled publication, each suppressed research project, each deleted social media post creates a new data point in a pattern that becomes hard to ignore. The truth spreads like a virus through the digital underground. 12 months later, Maya Patel is 17 years old and has never heard of Nova Chen, Lynx Rodriguez, Jax Morrison, or Professor Kale. She lives in a small village in rural India, where internet access is limited, and social media is considered a luxury for urban elites. But Maya is smart, curious, and has access to her school's computer lab 3 days a week. She spends her time learning about environmental science, genetic engineering, and the intersection of technology and biology. Her dream is to study at a Western university and help solve the world's agricultural challenges. It's during one of these computer lab sessions that she finds the flash drive. Buried in a box of discarded electronics donated to the school, wrapped in plastic and electrical tape like someone tried very hard to preserve it. The label, written in faded ink, reads, Population Zero Proof.Vault. Maya plugs it into the computer, expecting maybe some students' old homework or family photos. Instead, she finds 847 gigabytes of encrypted data files, research documents, intercepted communications, and video recordings. She finds genetic modification protocols, pharmaceutical patents, agricultural contamination systems, and psychological warfare strategies. She finds the complete archive of everything Nova Chen's team discovered about Project Aegis. The encryption is military grade, but Maya is patient and clever. She spends 3 weeks cracking the access codes, working during lunch breaks and staying after school until the janitor kicks her out. When she finally opens the files, she spends another week just trying to understand what she's looking at. Population reduction through coordinated biological intervention. Genetic modification systems activated by environmental triggers. Food chain contamination designed to cause sterility and immune system failure. Psychological warfare campaigns to normalize extinction and reduce resistance to authority. A timeline that originally targeted 2030, but has been accelerated to 2027. Maya realizes she's looking at the blueprint for humanity's planned extinction, and according to the timestamps on the most recent files, the final phase is scheduled to begin in 6 months. She copies everything to multiple storage devices and begins the careful process of verification, cross-referencing patent filings, pharmaceutical research, agricultural modifications, environmental monitoring data. Every piece of evidence Nova's team gathered, Maya confirms through independent research. It's all true, it's all happening, and almost nobody knows. But Maya Patel is 17 years old, raised in a culture that reveres education and truth-telling above personal safety. She doesn't consider keeping the information secret. She doesn't wonder if she might be wrong. She doesn't worry about the consequences of speaking truth to power. She uploads everything to every platform she can access. WikiLeaks, anonymous file-sharing networks, academic databases, social media platforms, government transparency websites, journalist tip lines, activist organizations, environmental groups, medical research communities. She translates key documents into 17 languages and distributes them through international networks. She creates simplified summaries for non-technical audiences and detailed analyses for subject matter experts. She floods the internet with the truth about Project Aegis, and this time it's too late to stop the signal. Within hours, Maya's uploads are being downloaded thousands of times. Within days, the downloads become millions. Major news outlets pick up the story. Government officials demand investigations. International health organizations call emergency sessions. The carefully orchestrated plan to reduce human population through biological warfare becomes the most documented conspiracy in human history. Dr. Harrison Vale attempts to discredit the documents as sophisticated forgeries. The WHO director claims the communications were taken out of context. Government officials deny any knowledge of population reduction protocols. But the evidence is overwhelming, the documentation is comprehensive, and the verification is independent. Too many researchers, in too many countries, using too many different methodologies, all reach the same conclusion. Project Aegis is real, it's operational, and it's working. Global fertility rates have dropped 34% over the past 3 years. Autoimmune disorders have increased 78% in demographics that received certain vaccine formulations. Agricultural workers in modified crop regions show genetic markers consistent with engineered biological agents. Psychological depression and suicide rates have reached historic highs in precisely the age groups targeted by media manipulation campaigns. The population reduction protocol isn't a future threat. It's already killed millions of people. 18 months after the warehouse, Maya Patel stands before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, testifying about the greatest crime in human history. Behind her sits a display showing population statistics, fertility decline curves, mortality data, and genetic modification evidence. She holds up a small flash drive, the same one she found in a box of discarded electronics in her school's computer lab. This device, she tells the court, contains the complete records of Project Aegis, compiled by 4 researchers who died trying to warn the world about what was being done to us. She sets the drive on the witness stand. Nova Chen was 26 years old when she was murdered for discovering that our governments and corporations had poisoned the human race. Lynx Rodriguez was 32 when he died, defending her right to tell the truth. Jax Morrison was 21 when they gave their life to upload this evidence to radio networks around the world. Professor Kale was 58 when he was killed for asking the wrong questions about biological modification research. Maya looks directly at the defendants, pharmaceutical executives, government officials, and corporate leaders who sit in chains behind bulletproof glass. They died so that we could live. They died so that humanity would know what was done to us. They died so that the people responsible for the greatest genocide in history would be held accountable. She picks up the flash drive again. Their names were Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kyle. They saved our species, and they want you to remember that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people who want to hide it. The courtroom falls silent as Maya's testimony ends. In the gallery, family members of victims weep quietly. In the press section, journalists furiously type stories that will reach billions of readers within hours, and in a small village in rural India, a 17-year-old girl's computer science teacher watches the live broadcast and smiles proudly at his former student. Sometimes the truth finds a way. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes 4 people in a warehouse can save the world, even after they're gone. Epilogue. The network remembers, 5 years later, the Maya Patel Institute for Digital Truth and Transparency occupies a gleaming building in New Geneva, funded by reparations payments from the corporations responsible for Project Aegis. Its mission statement, carved in stone above the entrance, reads, "The network remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wants forgotten." In the lobby, 4 portraits hang side by side. Nova Chen, cryptographer and digital warrior; Lynx Rodriguez, intelligence analyst and protector; Jax Morrison, social engineer and technological prodigy; Professor Kyle, virologist and truth-teller. Beneath their portraits a simple inscription: "They found the code that wasn't meant to be found." Tourists and students pass by the portraits daily, most not knowing the full story of how 4 people in a converted warehouse prevented the extinction of human civilization. But the staff of the Institute know, the researchers working on digital rights and technological transparency know, the activists fighting against corporate surveillance and biological manipulation know. And late at night, when the building is empty and the servers hum quietly in climate-controlled rooms, network traffic monitors occasionally detect unusual patterns in the data streams. Fragments of code that shouldn't exist, routed through pathways that don't appear on any network topology. Some say it's just background noise, artifacts of old systems and deprecated protocols. Others believe it's something more, digital ghosts of 4 researchers who refuse to let death stop their work, still uploading, still broadcasting, still fighting to keep the truth alive in the spaces between the data. The network remembers everything, and sometimes, late at night in the digital underground, the network remembers back,